Midland Moment podcast, the podcast dedicated to telling the story of Midland through the eyes of its employees. I'm your host, Jeremy Wiltz. Super excited today to have Beth Priddy with me. Beth serves as our QAPI RN, and she is coming up on her 30th year with Midland this September, and we are really excited to talk about her career here and learn from her over this time. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you.
So Beth, just would love to start, especially with your long tenure here. If you could just tell us kind of maybe walk us through your career at Midland, what brought you here in the first place, and then kind of what your different positions have been here since the beginning.
Okay. Well, I had been working at the VA Medical Center here in Topeka, and I was on a unit that had telemetry, which is heart monitoring, and we had oncology, so we gave chemotherapy, and we had 5 beds of hospice. And I really enjoyed working with those hospice patients, and knew a nurse that had gone from ICU there to here and kept talking to her and saying, "Oh, you have my dream job." And so in 1994, I applied. Had actually applied when we were at the bed and breakfast. But at that time, I couldn't swing the on-call time with my husband's schedule. So I was able to start here in September of 1994, right after we moved to this campus.
So what was your first position when you came on board? Was it a field RN for hospice? Is that
right? I was actually just a part-time RN case manager for hospice. And of course, hospice was the only program we had then.
Right.
But I quickly moved into a full-time position.
Okay. So thinking back at that time, you said that was before this campus. That was before the Fraser campus that you applied the first time.
Right.
And you couldn't swing the on-call pay. So, and we had just recently moved on to this campus when you started then. So that's kind of a fun history. We're in Building B right now. And for those of you that don't know, we used to have a daycare in the basement of Building B probably when you started out here. So that's how Midland has changed over the years. So what currently with your RN position in QAPI, can you tell people that may not be familiar with QAPI, which is Quality Assurance Performance Improvement Department at Midland, what your responsibilities look like right now?
Well, QAPI looks at how Midland maintains the quality of care for all of our patients and participants for all our programs. And it also looks at how we meet regulatory compliance, which of course just has increased exponentially over the years. But because we are primarily paid by Medicare and Medicaid, those are the regulatory bodies that we really have to meet specific regulations for every program. So I look over regulations regarding clinical services, which is hospice and home health and palliative care.
And so with you doing that, and for those of you that haven't sat in on a QAPI meeting, you will hear from Beth as she does some audits and those sorts of things. And she relays those results out to us to make sure that we stay in compliance. We also you'll hear from times that we have a QAPI project going on, which is where we've identified a weakness in some area of our organization that we're working on. And that all comes from the team that Beth works with. I want to loop back just a little bit. I know we talked about how you came on as a part-time RN and then became a full-time RN soon after. I know you've held other positions within the organization. And can you just tell me, just kind of walk through the rest of that timeline with us of where all you've been? Because I think it's a really cool story that you're able to tell through that.
Sure. About 6 months in, we had one admission RN at that time, and she was getting kind of overloaded with work. So they decided to hire another admissions RN, and I applied for that. And so I was an admissions RN for a number of years. Then we hired another gal to do that also. And so we worked as a team, and we took all the incoming calls too. So we took any phone calls related to care and referrals, those types of things. And then I went on to be an RN case manager again, I believe. And at that time, our directors were our VPs, and I was over hospice at that time. So I was the director of hospice, essentially, in that role. And also then we had director of admissions, and I was asked to go into that position because that had just opened up. And then I became director of hospice, and that's when we hired our VPs too.
And I think that's such a cool story because it just exemplifies how getting into Midland, and if you buy into the mission and you love the work that you're doing, the opportunities within Midland to grow are really cool. And now 30 years later, sitting as the QAPI RN, all of that experience, I would imagine, is directly fed into your ability to get in the clinician mindset when you're auditing those charts or looking at those things.
Right.
So you've been here for 30 years. What keeps you here? What makes you want to come to work at Midland each and every day?
Well, it's always been driven by our mission and, that we want to serve the whole community. I was always really excited when we started new programs. We started palliative care, and I was able to be on the committee that kind of looked into how we were going to do that and hire our first physician for that program. And of course, it's changed a lot over the years, but that was really exciting. And then, of course, when PACE came on board, I was able to work over there when we had far fewer participants, but there too. When we opened the hospice house, I was helping, clean furniture and do all kinds of things as we were getting ready to open that building. And that was really exciting. And it's just, I've been able to see how Midland has been able to meet all these needs in the community as soon as we were able to, and we saw that. And so that's exciting to see our growth, over the years, because when I started, most of the buildings weren't open, and Building A had all these empty rooms, so to see us expand like we have has been really exciting, and knowing that we're doing so well for all these communities.
That's crazy to me to think that we would have any open room on this main campus, let alone at all of our buildings. Yeah. For those of you that don't spend a lot of time in Building A, I feel like we are almost at the point of putting people in closets at this point to try and find office space for people. And so that's a great timeline. And remind me, and I think you'll know the answer to this probably better than I will. When did we become Medicare certified from a hospice? I was thinking it was early 90s. It was right before you came, right?
It was, yeah.
It's like 1991, 1992, kind of in that time frame. And I think that's kind of unbelievable when you look at our story, because our story didn't start with Medicare payment. We weren't a hospice that started because we could make money and get paid at this. We started because we identified a need for that care in our community, much like you talked about with the hospice house, palliative care, PACE, home health, all of those things. We identified a need we thought we could fill, and then we figured out how to do it. When the payment came in, that obviously made it easier to do and made us be able to serve more people, but that was not the starting point. The starting point was our community needs us. How can we do that? And I think that was exemplified by what you were talking about. And we talked before we started just about, caring for patients regardless of their ability to pay. And I think that's really cool, being the only real not-for-profit hospice in this area. Right. And one of the few not-for-profit hospices left on an independent scale in the state. And so really, really exciting stuff. So we've talked a lot about the values that keep you here. Are there any stories that stick out to you? Are there any instances where you saw employees that, doing something, or you were involved in something that just made you go, wow, this is a great place that really has the heart for people?
Well, sure. I would like to mention, though, when you were talking about how we started, we started in 1978 with the first not-for-profit and volunteer hospice. And I wasn't originally from the Topeka area, but my grandparents lived here, and I would go to Stormont because my grandmother was in the hospital there. And across the street was this old house with this big hospice sign on it. So this was like 1977, 78, something like that. And that's one of my first memories of what became Midland, and I kind of thought at that time I was already looking at going into nursing. So I don't know, that's a memory that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the cool things. I get the opportunity to speak at new employee orientation. It's one of the cool things is there's very few people that are from Topeka working in this area that haven't heard of Midland or haven't had someone served by them. We're in our 45th, going on 46th year now of serving the community. And I think it's crazy how many of those stories there are of seeing Midland, having a memory of Midland, and it's part of the Topeka landscape for sure.
Yeah.
So what excites you about where we're going? What excites you about where Midland is heading for the future?
Well, I think just that we're expanding for the boomer population, which I'm part of, for one thing. And so it's nice to know that there's programs out there for that generation and others that are coming up and aging. It's exciting to see that hospice has grown again, because I've been through times that it really waned and then grew again. And, that we're also with palliative care in the hospital. We have a clinic here to serve people that aren't quite ready for hospice. Just those things, to know that we're in lots of parts of the community and in outlying communities and other cities helping.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting concept that we have been exploring, really the continuum of care. And it started with hospice when you first started, and you talked about how palliative care was added and PACE was added and the hospice house was added. And it's really, when we add home health and we add the ACO stuff that we're doing and all those directions we're going, we've become more of an elder care company than just a hospice company. And that's a cool transition, because it's not just taking care of people in their last days. It's one of our passions. It's at the core of who we are, and we don't discount that, but we've become so much more than that as well. It's, if you were in the hospital, we're probably the answer for you after the hospital, which is really cool to be able to say to people that if you need us, just call us. The sooner you call, the sooner we can help. All of those taglines that we have, it just is exemplified in what you have been saying of your legacy through Midland. And so I always end with, it's been the same, and I usually am able to surprise people, but Beth listens to a few of the podcasts, so she might know what question I'm going to ask. But I always am interested to know, when you were a kid, you've done the RN thing for a while. Was RN what you wanted to be when you were a kid, or what was your dream job? What did you think you were going to be when you were growing up?
Well, I first wanted to be a stewardess, as they were called then, because I wanted to travel.
Yeah.
But then I realized I was going to be too tall, because I was already getting tall, and I'm 6 feet now. I don't think they have a height limit anymore. But when I was 16, I volunteered and was a candy striper at a hospital in Salina, where I'm originally from. And I really liked, you didn't do any hands-on stuff, of course, with patients, but I really liked being in the hospital and seeing what the nurses did. And then I got my home health aide my senior year of high school, and worked briefly as that before I got my nursing degrees. So I once I started, nursing was it at that point.
Yeah. That's super cool. And Beth, thank you for being with us today. For those of you listening, we also had Beth in our employee spotlight recently. So make sure for Midland employees, you got it in your email, but we also have it on our social media and on our website under the news tab. So make sure to check that out. Beth, thanks again for all you do for Midland and for your 30 years of service to us. And thank you for coming on here today.